Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. You guys are truly in for a treat today. I have Paige joining me again. She's a working mother of 4 who shares relatable content on TikTok and Instagram, highlighting the everyday experiences of women balancing their motherhood, careers, and relationships. She's known for her super candid insight on the mental load of motherhood and the challenges of creating equity within the home and work. And Paige's content resonates with millions. Her stuff is amazing, let me tell you. She also advocates for affordable childcare, paid leave, and reproductive rights, sparking important conversations about what families truly need to thrive. Her impactful voice and relatable storytelling have led to features in Scary Mommy, The Today Show, Good Morning America, and so much more. So I'm super honored to have her back for an episode today. It's definitely worth the listen, so hang in there and I hope you enjoy. I'm so excited for Paige to be joining me again. Thank you for coming back and joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. We're going to do a little bit of like a similar topic, and if not the same exactly, right, to what we did last time. But I think it's so important to talk about just like parenting, the mental load, and all that kind of
Mhm.
goes along with being a parent. Because I think it can feel so isolating. So I know a lot of people relate to your content that you're putting up online because they're like, yes, that's me. I feel this. And it feels really good to hear other people going through similar things. So I'm excited to dive into that today.
Yeah, I mean, the mental load is something that I think now is such a buzzword,
Oh,
right? But
yeah.
probably like 2 years ago, we didn't even have the word, or at
Yeah.
least I didn't feel like I had the word at first. And so it's interesting because I think now everybody's talking about the mental load, but I still think there's a bit of confusion about what it is and how
Right.
it shows up and what are we supposed to do about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we want to dive into that today too, but do you want to tell everybody a little bit about you and your life
Sure.
and all the things before we jump into it too deep?
Yeah, sure. So I am a working mom of 4 kids. My kids are all like 7.5 and under. So they're still kind of young. We've entered public school age, so things are
Yay.
changing around here. But yeah, I work, I take care of my kids, and I create content on TikTok and Instagram and kind of everywhere on social media. Mostly focusing in on a few core things. I really talk about gender equity and what that looks like, and as it pertains to things like the mental load or
Yeah.
being a working parent and the double standards that often exist between men and women when it comes to
Right.
parenting, but also systemic issues, right? I talk a lot about the lack of affordable childcare, the lack of paid parental leave, and how all of these things are so connected. And a lot of what inspired me to talk about all of this was just lived experience. And I
Right.
think I, along with many other women, have just walked this walk and we've lived this life. And, I think everyone feels like something's kind of got to give, and we're trying to figure out how to navigate forward.
Yeah. I think that like you said, it's just been kind of like a standard that even though like women were home and not working for generations, right? And then now it's okay, you're working, but now you're still expected to have everything under control at home. And then like you said, the mental load word and like kind of the aspect of, um, like co-parents, but especially fathers being more present in parenting is becoming better in a way, right? But at the same
Yeah,
time, I think that we see dads being physically present, but forget about the actual like behind the scenes mental side of it, right? Like all of the things that moms are still thinking and doing in order to keep everything afloat and actually do the things, right?
for sure. Yeah. Well, so I think there's a couple of things that I think about, which is first and foremost, like I think there's this idea, and I bought into it too, that historically women stayed at home. But
Right.
when I even think about my own family, my grandmothers worked, my aunts worked, my mom worked, everybody was always working. And
Yeah.
the data supports that pretty much always the majority of women have been working. Whether or not they're getting paid for that work,
Right.
TBD, right? Like depends. But they've been working in some capacity. And so this narrative that before we didn't work and now we do, which is what makes it so hard, I think is actually not really representative of the struggles that we have. What I think
Mm,
has happened is the expectations of what we expect from mothers has changed quite drastically, right? We even joke like as a 90s kid, people will be like, "Oh, I was a latchkey kid," or my parents left me in the car while they went grocery shopping, right? Like all these things will like say, and now it's like my sister's like, I can't even run into Dunkin' Donuts to grab my coffee because somebody's going to call the cops on me, right? Even though it's mobile
right.
order and I'm going to be out of my car for 4 seconds. And so the expectations we've placed on mothers in
Yeah.
particular has changed quite drastically. And I think the data shows that um, working mothers today spend more time with our kids than stay-at-home mothers in the 70s did. And so,
Mm,
if we're comparing, we are spending so much time with our children.
right.
There's a lot of pressure on mothers in particular to constantly be parenting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this world of like information overload, right? We're constantly being told how to parent, how we're failing at parenting, like all these things on social media. But also working, right? And so the expectations have slightly changed. And even things like how old were you when you walked home from the bus stop? Right versus
Right.
now. Those rules are different. And so, and I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying the expectations have changed, which
Right.
I think is actually what's made motherhood much harder.
Mm,
Um, and there's much less, there's much less time for women in general. Women have
right.
much less time for themselves at all compared to previous generations.
Right. I think the burnout is like a big part of that too, right? Like you were mentioning, and I think it's so important to state, like, yeah, it's also, the world differences that have changed. So yeah, taking a walking home from the bus as an example, right? Or being able to, leave your kid with with like a neighbor or like a neighborhood kid. Like that's just not a thing anymore, right? Like we have more
No.
mother's helpers where you're still having to be present than we are letting, the 10-year-old down the street watch your kid. And it's so crazy because yeah, we know more and things are changing in the world and expectations, which then puts more on parents and mothers' plates. And I think that the social media aspect plays like a really big role into that as well because
Yeah.
it's that, okay, well, I'm expected to just do XYZ, and that's what I'm supposed to do as a mom, and I'm supposed to know what to do, and I'm supposed to be able to have enough time to do all these things. But then realistically, like, how? I have so many people
Mm-hmm.
saying to me, like, I don't know, I'm going back to work and like I'm already struggling to be able to make sure that like dinner's on the table with being home
Yeah.
with a baby. How am I supposed to be able to do all of this and then still have time for myself and my marriage and my partner and, not being completely tapped out? It's so challenging.
Yeah. When you mentioned that dads are more present now, which is true, right? Like, men are much more present in their families than they were previously. But unfortunately, what I think has happened is um, men have become much more present, but they haven't taken on the accountability and responsibility in the way
Right.
that women have. And again, those expectations that are placed on our shoulders are different, right? So as a mom, if I feed my kid chicken nuggets, people will judge me for being lazy. If a dad does it, well, at least dad made dinner. Like that's
Right.
great. He made dinner, right? And so there's very different expectations. If I showed up at school, I was actually at my daughter's school the other day, and a dad showed up with a lunchbox. Kid forgot it. And they're like, who's her teacher? And he could not say he
Oh
had
my
no idea who the teacher
gosh.
was. If I did that, there would be such harsh judgment,
Oh
right?
yeah.
But this is true in even how we show up online. My feed, the second I became a mother, was just inundated with parenting experts and advice and momfluencers and the best crib to buy and all this stuff. My husband's maintained the exact same algorithm he had before: golfing, woodworking, sports, right?
Right.
Nothing about being a dad, nothing in there about the best crib to buy. That
Yep.
was all on my shoulders. And so,
Mm,
as we enter into parenting too, a lot of the pressure and judgment comes towards moms. And so then there's this additional, it feels like additional accountability and responsibility to
right.
do well and to perform well. And there's not as much slack given to mothers, right? And even the way we kind of position, to your point of going back to work, like most mothers work these days, most women work these days in some capacity.
Yep.
And the narrative of being a mother who works is often that you've abandoned your child for somebody else to
Yeah.
raise them. And for men, it's that they're providing for their families. And so
Hmm.
the narrative is different. And when women work, it's selfish. When men work, it's selfless.
Yep.
So it is important for us to kind of, as women and mothers in particular, to be aware of this, right? This societal conditioning.
Yeah.
Because when you're not aware of it, that's half the battle of the burnout, right? It's like having to like push all these thoughts and pressures and ideas out of your own head and say, no, like, no, I am not a failure, or no, I'm not abandoning my child.
Yeah.
And like, no. And I don't think dads have to deal with that in the same way that moms do. And so I
Hmm.
think that is half of it. But obviously there's also the work, like the
Yeah.
actual work of taking care of these little people in our homes. And it's all a lot. It's a lot to deal
Yeah.
with.
Well, and I think also it's, dads don't see, I think the point that you made about social media is like so important to acknowledge because I think dads are also, not experiencing that, not seeing that, and then they're hearing, moms being like, "Oh, it's exhausting. Oh, people say this or say that or look at me this way or look at me that way." And they don't understand it because they don't really see it, right? And so they can very easily be like, "Oh, okay, like, oh, you're probably just like thinking of things," right? Like I've heard so many dads be like, "Oh, like, the person that told you had your hands full at the grocery store was probably just like, oh, they were just being funny or like whatever." When in reality, like dads go to the grocery store and it's like, "Oh, you're babysitting, you're taking your kids out and you're grocery
Super
shopping."
dad.
Oh my gosh, super dad. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think it's so hard. Now, I know like you were really trying to kind of I don't even know what word to use. It's not like nip this in the butt, but like trying to change, I guess, the idea behind a lot of this
Yeah.
on your social media, right? Like bring it to light, bring it center stage and kind of like make people aware of this. What do you see is like helping parents to understand that this is going on? And then also, what do you think might help for us to be able to break this stigma a little bit?
Yeah. So I think it's tough, especially right now. I think politically, this is like actually a
Right.
huge conversation, gender equity, right? And
Oh yeah.
women and men, and what are we supposed to be doing? What were we built for, right? I think it's a
Yep.
big conversation. I think I often suggest that we start where we are, which is our
Yeah.
homes, right? And for me, when I was kind of drowning in it, and a new mom, I could never have imagined talking about equity outside of my home because I was struggling in my home, right?
Right.
So I always do suggest that we start at home as much as we can. And so I always say you have to have a loving and willing and able partner, right? A partner
Yeah.
who wants to engage in these kinds of conversations, who loves you and wants you to be happy. Because I think if we enter into these conversations about gender equity with a goal in mind, which is that I want to be happy, I want you to be happy, I want us
Right.
to be happy, right? And I want us to be functioning and thriving. And that is what I ultimately want for our family, not it's me against you. It's
Right.
us against this problem, right? And this dynamic that exists in our home. And that dynamic is the problem. It's not us, it's
Absolutely.
this dynamic. And so um, I think that's where I like to start. But I think the most important thing for people to do is start to be able to just talk about it. That's like the
Yeah.
number one thing, is being able to say what you're experiencing, right? Being able to put words to the burnout or put words to the mental load, and then be able to actually describe it to your partner. I think the thing that so many people experience is like having that same recurring fight about the dishwasher or something.
Right.
And it's never really about the dishwasher, right? It's about respect and our time and how we value one another, right? It's about all these other things. It's not actually about the dishwasher, because when that respect exists, and we place value on everybody's time equally, and we see one another within our partnerships, we don't fight about the dishwasher, right? It's like
Right.
not a big deal. I say this to people all the time. When my husband and I were in the thick of the inequities between us when it came to, say, chores and the mental load and all of that, something like him forgetting to empty the dishwasher would ruin my day, because
Hmm.
it would essentially kind of signal to me that he didn't care about my time
Yep.
or respect me or hear me or see the work I was doing. And it hurt. Now, if he forgets the dishwasher, I don't care, because we've worked so hard at this conversation, because I know he respects me and sees me and values my time, because he's an equal partner. And because sometimes I forget stuff too, right? But
Right.
it's because we've put in the work and we both show up.
Yeah.
every single day to participate in our homes. So now we have much more grace for one another. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I think is really important as we think about this, which is it's not meant to be a tit for tat conversation. It's not meant to be, this is what I do, this is what you do. This is meant to find a place where both partners are happy, healthy, and thriving, and that the
Right.
home is functioning well, right? And it's always going to be evolving. It's going to be an ongoing conversation. It never ends, unfortunately, especially if you have children,
Yeah.
because
Oh,
children
things are
are always,
constantly changing.
yeah, somebody's sick, somebody went to a new school, somebody started a new sport, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like there's always something.
Yeah.
Um, Start a new job, any of these things will kind of change the dynamics of your homes. But I think having that idea that like we're on the same team, we ultimately have the same goal. Let's work towards that. What will it take to get there? And
Right.
how do we navigate this together? And how does it feel fair? Because I
Yeah.
think nobody wants to be in a relationship that doesn't feel fair.
Absolutely. And I think like it all really connects to and starts with, like you were mentioning, you have to also like want and have a partner, you and your partner both like
Yeah.
want to be able to be in this like happy state, right? And it's also, you think about it, it's like if moms are doing all of this work and dads aren't, then like that also is going to totally mess with like your partnership and your marriage and being able to have more of a dynamic that is
Yeah.
happy for both partners is going to ultimately, like you said, right, like I'm happy, you're happy, and then that marriage, that partnership is so much happier, right? And I find for
Yeah.
a lot of people, after they have babies, especially the first, and then I mean others too, but it's a big change to go from having no kids to having children and putting somebody else before yourself and your partner at times. And so for
Hmm.
a lot of people, they're like, how do I navigate this? So I would love to also know, I know that you experienced this in your household after your kiddos were here and you had some, littles in your house. Now, what if families are listening and are wanting to make sure they're starting this off on the right foot? Like, do you have like a place or like an idea of somewhere they could start? I know in our last we talked about the whole like list from the
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the kind
Fair
of
play.
division lift.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I know that, there that might work for some. And a lot of times people are like, you don't know till you don't know. So I
of
guess, is
course.
there a good place to start to kind of have people feel like they are going into this parenthood journey on the right foot? Hey guys, it's Madison. Yeah, I'm here interrupting myself, but I wanted to take a minute to talk about something that can feel so overwhelming as a parent: sleep. So, if you are in the thick of the sleepless nights, struggling to figure out how to get your baby and yourself to get more rest, then I want you to know that you're not alone. Here's the thing: if what you're doing is working for you, great, keep doing it. But if it's not, there are resources to help, and I'm happy to be one of them. As a certified pediatric sleep consultant, I work with families to create personalized sleep plans that actually make sense for your current and unique situation. No cookie cutter advice, just practical strategies that match your parenting style and your child's personality. Because let's be real, sleep is not a luxury, it is a necessity. So, if you're ready to make a change, I'd love to help. You can book a free sleep connection call on my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com, or reach out to me on Instagram at serenemoments.doula.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you don't have kids yet, you probably still have time to read. So
Oh,
I was
yeah.
going to say, read some books. I really like, there's a couple different books that I think are good. And Fair Play is one of them. I think Fair Play is a great book, but it's by Eve Rodsky. I really like Fed Up by Gemma Hartley. Emotional Labor by Rose Hackman. Another book that is written by a man. So if any men are kind of wanting to read something from that perspective, it's called This Is How Your Marriage Ends, which I
Okay.
think is a really interesting book by Matthew Frey, I think it is.
Okay.
And so I think reading and kind of hearing perspectives from people
Yeah.
who've walked the walk before you, but also I think you can have these conversations before children, right? And I
Oh,
think you
yeah.
can start to prepare. I think one of the things, and I don't know if you and I talked about it last time, but I think this division of labor and this mental load conversation often can be had well before children.
Oh,
It
yeah.
is typically amplified when you have children, right? So it
Right.
might have been slightly unequal before kids, but then when you have kids, the person who maybe takes on the bulk of like the paperwork now has 10x the paperwork
Right.
with a child involved, right? And so now it's incredibly unequal. And so being aware to constantly be touching base, but also understanding the way the system is going to be working against you.
Mhm.
And when I say systems, I mean like our workplaces, I mean the childcare
Yeah.
system, lack of paid leave, all of these things, right? So if you can sit down with your partner and say, hey, you're not going to have paid leave. I'm going to maybe get 8 weeks of paid leave. I don't want this to be an excuse for you to check out of parenting our newborn baby. So,
Right.
how are you going to participate? How are you going to support me? How can I support you? How can we be a team?
Yeah.
Um, I always tell men, I don't care if you've gone back to work, you should still be doing some of the overnight feedings because that is how you bond with your baby. And ultimately, at some point, your partner is going to go back to work too. And chances are at that point, you're not going to step back in for those overnights. And
Right.
if you do step back in for those overnights, now you're going to say, well, you're just better at it than me. And it's because
Right.
your partner's been doing it for a
Doing
couple of
it for
months and you
longer.
haven't. So it's those kinds of conversations, right? How do we set ourselves up for success so that way? Because what happens is, right, women typically take the leave, men don't take the leave. And so women take on a lot of the work of the baby up front. And then when they go back to work, because again, majority of women work, they never get to hand that work back.
Yep.
And that work stays with them. And then it kind of snowballs, right? They become the person to research the daycare. Well, now they're the
Mhm.
main point of contact for the daycare. Well, now who does the daycare call when the baby's sick? Mom, right? And it's this ongoing conversation, but also, societally, we expect women to do that. We expect women to take the sick day. We expect women to be the point of
Right.
contact for kids, to take them to the doctors, all those things. Um, and the data shows that women are twice as likely to leave their careers or adjust their careers in order to accommodate for lack of childcare or the cost of
Right.
childcare, than men. And again, it's that kind of expectation that we've placed on
Yeah.
women to do that. And so if we can have these conversations and talk about these things with our partner before, where we say, if our daycare shut down tomorrow, what are we doing?
Right.
And how are we fixing it? Um, what does that conversation look like? Right. And we're not just talking about the here and now, but we're also talking about the long term implications, right? We need to
Mhm.
think long term. What's 10 years down the road if I leave my job for 6 months or a year?
Right.
What's 5 years? I think those are conversations you can have before kids. It's harder because
Absolutely.
you really have to, like, I don't know, kind
Right,
of
you have
make
to
it
kind of
up.
like imagine it, right? It
Yeah.
definitely is. But I think
Yeah.
like I know you've posted about this online before and like people totally relate. It's that idea that like you said, women are more likely to leave their jobs to be home. And then it's like, okay, well, yeah, that might save you some money in the meantime because good gosh, is childcare expensive,
So
especially
expensive.
if you're sending them to like a center or something and you don't have, family or a village, which has its own, mental
Yeah.
payments that you're making, right? But but then you have to think about, like you said, the long term. So, like, if you were to leave your job, like, realistically, what is that doing for your career path? What is that doing for your potential income? Like, are you now going to be home and really not making enough to, like, actually enjoy being at home? And now, are you expected to take on all of these house roles that may or may not have been divided more
Yeah.
equally or equitably prior to? There's so much that goes into things. And I think that when you're not the person that thinks about that, which again is typically moms that are thinking about all these things, it's very quick and easy for dads to be like, "Oh yeah, well like you just stay home and you just do all the things, right?" And that's where the phrase of
Hmm.
like, "Oh, what did you do all day?" comes into play when people get home, right?
Yeah.
It's intense for a lot.
It is. And we've talked a bit about working moms, but I think there's, stay-at-home mothers have the same struggles, right?
Exactly.
And there's this expectation that because you're home all day, you have all this free time. But if anybody has
Hmm.
parented young children, you know that that's just not true. And even as you have older kids, um, they're only in school for like 6 hours. And that's like when they're over five, right?
Right.
And there's so much work to be done during that
Right.
time. And so it's important to have this conversation regardless of whether or not you have paid work outside of the home. I think it
Yep.
is, um, there's this expectation that women are just inherently better equipped to care for our kids than our husbands are. And I just don't think that's true.
Yeah.
And the science backs that up. Like, men are very
Yeah.
capable of this if they do it, right?
Right.
If they participate, if they spend that time with their children, they are very, very capable of this. And if you're a dad, I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to participate, right? Because there's
Right.
so much joy and kind of bonding and caring for your children, right? And I joked with my husband when we had dogs before kids. I'd be like, "You're the fun one," right? And that's a dynamic
Yeah.
that a lot of parents have. Dad's the fun one. I used to say, like, you wrestle with them, you play with them, like you're fun, you do
Hmm.
fetch, whatever. When they're sick, I was like, they literally come to my side of the bed and cry in my face because they know that I'm going to take
Yep.
care of them. And I was like, that's an indicator, right? That like
Yep.
I'm
Right
going to take
there.
care of them. And this was with dogs, right? And so with kids now, we've worked really hard not to have that dynamic where my kids, like the other day, I woke up and my daughter was there and I was like, when did you get here? And my husband was like, oh, yeah. She woke up 2 times and there were monsters in her bed. So I brought her in. And I was like, okay.
Oh my gosh.
Um, but like she went to him both times. She didn't walk around the bed to come to me. And she comes to me sometimes for sure. But um,
Yeah.
like we want our kids to see mom and dad both as equally capable of caring for them and
Right.
knowing them and um yeah, being able to help them when they're sick or when they
Right.
have a nightmare, any of those things. Like that's so
Absolutely.
important.
And inherently, like, parents are going to have different personalities, children are going to have different personalities,
Totally.
right? Like one of your children, I'm sure, comes to you when they're sad versus goes to like your husband when they're sad and vice versa. And you can really see that. And I see it when I'm with families that do have both very present partners and parents because, depending on the personality, one adult might be really good at handling a meltdown from one kid and one might be good at
Yeah.
handling the meltdown from the other, right? And especially when you have children that I feel like are like that nature nurture kicks in, right? You're like, oh, that's me. I can see myself in you, and this is where I can step in and understand what you're feeling, right? And I think that that's so cool to like have that, you know, division of, okay, well, I'm really good at this and you're really good at that. And we can kind of divide that up and conquer it a lot easier. And that goes for more
Hmm.
than just children and tantrums, right? Like all the house things, like
Yeah.
I know we talked about in our last episode how like the lists that people may have may not be exactly equal number wise, but in the time and effort and mental aspect of things that it takes one person versus the other. Some people may be really good at, the finances and other people are not, right? And finding that
Yeah.
balance that works for each family and makes, like we said, everybody feel happy in their own place and in their own partnership, I think is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I always say equitable, not equal, right?
Yeah,
Because it's never going to be equal. It's never going to be 50-50.
right.
Um, it just can't be. That's just not how it works, right? Like
No,
even last week I was sick. And so like was I pulling my fair share? Definitely not.
it's
No, I
never
wasn't. I was sick.
50-50. Yeah.
It's never 50-50. And I think you have to be okay with that. But if you know that you're both putting in equal effort,
Yes.
right? Even if it's not equal chores or equal time with the
Right.
kids, is there equal effort and care and respect that matters? And I think it's
Absolutely.
very possible. Sometimes people will say these conversations are inherently like anti men, and I don't think they are. I think what they are is meant to invite men into the experience of being a parent and a partner in a more meaningful way than we've expected from them in the past, right? Um, there is value. Like even the stats where it's like dads in the 80s, like so many of them had never changed a diaper. They just
Yep.
had never done it. And now it's like very rare for a man to not have changed his kid's diaper at least once.
Right.
Um, but like diaper changes, yeah, they're a bummer sometimes, right? But like that's when you get that like one-on-one time with your kid, right? Like there's
Right.
actual value in these things that we're asking people to participate in and
Yeah.
also information, right? Like when I empty a lunchbox, I see what my kid ate and didn't eat. I understand what they like, what they don't like. I
Mhm.
will be better equipped to talk to their doctor about the fact that they're really not touching protein these days, right? Like there is
Mhm.
value. I'm not just emptying a lunchbox. I know it seems silly to say that it's like
Right.
this heavy thing. It's not that it's heavy, but it's information, right?
Right.
Every time you change a diaper, you pay attention to if they're hydrated enough or not hydrated. When's the last
Right.
time? How often do parents say when's the last time they pooped? I mean, we say it like at the every. I'm
Oh,
like, do you know when the
constant,
last time she
right?
pooped? Right? And it's
Yeah.
like, being in the know, being a part of these everyday things, as small as they might seem, have value for us as
Absolutely.
parents and for our children. And so I think it's really meaningful when men can participate equitably in all of this stuff because it makes such a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think like it's for children and it's also, I guess that ties into like that mental load idea, but like household stuff too, right? Like,
Hmm.
okay, yeah, maybe you did a diaper, like, are you running low on diaper cream? Or like, if you're the one that packs the lunch boxes, like, do you need to buy more ice packs or, more
Yeah.
this or that? And it definitely can become like really overwhelming because I think when you do sit back and you think about it in like a rational minded state, right? You can think about how every single little thing that I'm sure you do every day has like so much more to it than just the actual task at hand.
Yeah.
And I think when you think about it in that way, especially if people are listening and able to, like we said, have this conversation before kiddos come into play, being able to have those like conversations in a rational mind and in a place where you're like, okay, like, yeah, it really is us against the problem. It's a lot easier to do that when you're in like, a cool state. Whereas, like, I know a lot of people will say, after baby comes, I'm so sleep deprived and so hormonal and so like just
Yeah.
angry or upset or whatever it may be. And waiting till things are going to bubble over and explode is not the time to have the conversation, right?
No, and we've all done it.
Yeah,
We've all done it. It's not always graceful. It's not always our best moment. Things happen.
absolutely.
But so don't feel bad if that's happened to you. It has happened to
Yes.
me, but it's usually not productive is the problem, right?
Right.
So it's not productive. It might make you feel better in the moment. It might be an opportunity to start a larger conversation, right? To
Right.
say, like, let's table this, let's revisit. But ultimately, it's usually not productive when we do it that way. And so, when we can go into these conversations and sit down and say, like, hey, we're having a conversation with a goal.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have a plan of action when we leave this table. Like, we are in it together. This is something we are doing. It just goes better. It's like when you
Oh,
sit down
yeah.
with your partner and you're like, we're planning a trip, right? We're
Yeah.
booking the flights, we're finding the hotel, we're building an itinerary. We are doing this together.
Yeah.
It has a purpose, right? You're doing it together for the purpose of going on this trip that is going to be great for you both. You're doing the same thing, building out this plan for how you're going to manage this in your home. How are you
I
going to
love
manage
that.
these things? What are your strengths? What are his strengths? And how do you play into those things? How do you support one another? Um, how do we teach one another? Maybe if our partner doesn't feel equipped to do something, how do we teach them? What does that look like? And so, yeah, I don't think it has to be like, I said this in a comment on TikTok today. I was like, guys, it's not that deep, right? Like, it doesn't have
Right.
to be like some of this is deep. Yes, some of it's very deep. But sitting down to talk about this with our partner, it doesn't have to be super deep every single time, right? Like,
Yeah.
this can be somewhat of a neutral conversation if we're in a good position to hear each other out and
Yeah.
and build this conversation.
I was just gonna say that. I was like, the
Yeah.
first conversation may be a
Yeah.
little intense,
Yeah.
right? But like, if that's something that you're doing and you're implementing in your house, it probably also is a lot easier to be like, hey, I've noticed blah, 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 right? It's a lot
Yep.
easier to bring things up when you know that your partner is gonna be more open-minded. So I love that. And I love the analogy to like, yeah, planning a vacation, because absolutely it's a very similar idea. So why not think of
Yeah.
it as something exciting like that?
Or even buying a house, right? Like, you sit down with your partner, you're
Yeah.
like, okay, where are we looking? What's our budget? What do
Yep.
we want? What don't we want? Right? Like, we have these conversations with our partners all the time about
Yep.
things. It's not much different other than the sense that we're also having to deal with all of these outside pressures and
Right.
expectations that have been put on us. And that's the heavy part, right? That's the
Absolutely.
heavy part. Actually figuring out the day-to-day operations of a home, like that, once you've worked through the other stuff, that part, that can just like that
So
can get
easy.
easy over time. It can get
Yeah.
much easier if you just keep doing it.
Absolutely. I love that. I love it. And I don't want to overwhelm people too much. So I feel like we will definitely have your info below, right? And definitely check out Paige's content, because I feel like the more y'all scroll, the more you'll feel like, yep, that's me. And maybe they'll get some ideas of how to bring up different things. And like you said earlier, it's really hard to sometimes come up with the words to kind of bring up to your partner. And so being
Hmm.
able to kind of like binge some content, right? And come up with some words and some ways to explain what you're feeling and how to create this uh equity within your own household, I think can be really beneficial. So definitely check out Paige's content below. Hopefully some of the things we talked about today is relatable and you can bring to your own house. But yeah, thank you for joining me.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.